everybody, and welcome to an event sponsored by Wanakee Public Library. And my name is Cederstrom, and I am a librarian at Wanakee Public Library. Our presentation tonight is called Nordic Food and Fun During the Holiday Season. Nordic traditions abound in the upper Midwest, and from art forms to foodways to holidays, but those traditions are constantly changing. So what we're going to hear about tonight is some of the holidays that are celebrated in both Nordic countries and in Nordic America, as well as some of the traditions associated with those holidays. And we'll learn how they've kind of morphed and changed over time, and discuss ancient variants that which still are contained in our celebrations, and new innovations as well. And our speaker tonight, Marcus Cederstrom, is a public folklorist, and his research focuses on Scandinavian-American folk life. And currently, he works on a project titled Sustaining Scandinavian Folk Arts in the Upper Midwest, and also researches the intersections of labor and creative expression. And in addition, he works with indigenous communities on issues of sustainability, cultural revitalization, and pedagogy. And so here is Marcus.
Great, thanks. It's nice to be here. I appreciate everyone coming out. I know there are a couple of people having some audio trouble, so I just put in the chat there one way to kind of get to the preferences to test your speaker and audio if you have any trouble. I'm going to go ahead and switch over here and share my screen for my presentation, and then I'll pop my face back in once I'm done with that, and we can take some questions and have a little discussion there. I'm probably going to ask for you all to get involved, sort of, and I'll ask you to do that in the chat as we go along, to kind of throw in your experiences of Nordic holidays in the upper Midwest. So let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. So like Gay said, my name is Marcus Cederstrom. I work at the Department of German, Nordic, and Slavic at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I like saying my title because I think there's not too many people with this title. I'm the community curator of Nordic American folklore, which is something they'll pay you to do, apparently, which is fun for me. So let's go ahead and get started here. So I always try to start these presentations off a little bit with what folklore is, right? I'm a folklorist, great. What is folklore? Well, folklore is tradition, whether it's art or jokes or songs or stories or whatever it might be, that we pass down from one generation to another, or that's circulated between people in groups. Usually this happens orally, not always, but usually. So think about the things you learned from your parents that you've maybe taught your children or your friends or your neighbors. Those are all bits of folklore. So folklorists spend their time asking a lot of questions. We ask questions about communities, like who makes up a community? What does the community do that makes it unique and special? What kind of traditions do those communities have? How do they pass those traditions on? For a lot of Scandinavian communities, trolls, like the ones we see here, are a big part of their traditions. Some of you may even have stories about trolls here in Wisconsin. If you do, I would love to hear them. I actually heard one a couple of years ago doing some field work, a troll near a well in Stoughton, that a Norwegian American, his grandpa used to always warn him about the troll by the well, kept him away from the well for sure. But we don't just ask questions about communities, right? So we ask questions about individuals and about objects, about art, about food. So you can think about a Norwegian immigrant chest, or rose mauling, or lefse. And then you can think about the people who create these things. They're what we sometimes call tradition bearers or culture bearers. They're the people who have a specific traditional knowledge that's important to who they are. And it's probably important in some way to who you are. So sometimes you can find that information in books. Wisconsin, My Home by Therese Olesen is a great example and something you can probably pick up at the Wanakee Public Library. A lot of times though, individuals have that knowledge and slowly but surely they pass that information on. So that can, of course, take the form of stories. I still remember some of the nursery rhymes that my dad recited to us in Swedish when I was younger. But I also remember how to celebrate a Swedish Christmas. It means ham and meatballs and mashed potatoes and green peas on Christmas Eve. It means Santa is going to come knocking on the door in the middle of the afternoon, closer to early evening, I guess, and ask if there are any children around, any good children around. And my brothers and I will lie, and we will get some presents. And surely enough, my dad will have just returned home and just missed old Santa. But these aren't stories that I was told, right? These are traditions that have been passed on to me that I grew up actively taking part in. And we all have these traditions. We all have folklore that shapes our lives. So because of that, folklorists go out into a lot of different communities to talk with a lot of different people. Doing so helps us make just a little more sense of the world, whether it's how a community comes together or how people identify themselves or how immigration shapes our lives for generations. Or for the sake of today's discussion, what holidays can tell us about our communities. So that's what folklore is. Great. So what do I actually do? Well, as a folklorist, I document these things. I document these stories and pictures and jokes and holidays and family histories because they're an important part of folklore, because they're a history that individuals have control over. This is a history that doesn't always make it into the books you read at school, but it's still incredibly important to individuals, to families, to communities. These are the documents of the everyday lives that people have experienced. And those documents, sometimes again, not necessarily written down document, but a recording or an object, they help all of us see how people create and recreate their traditions. Because traditions and cultures, they change. And they have to change to stay relevant for the next generation. Sometimes it's in really drastic and obvious ways, and other times it's more subtle. And so we'll see some of that change today as we talk. So now to the actual food and fun part. We're getting close here to the holiday season, even though it doesn't always feel like it, but October is just around the way. And I just saw at the grocery store eggnog flavored ice cream. So as far as I'm concerned, it's basically Christmas. But I'm going to make you work to start with here. I'm going to switch back out of this, and I want to kind of hear what you think of. Little word association game. What are some words you associate with Nordic or Scandinavian foods and holidays? If you want to just go ahead and put that in the chat, I would love to hear. There we go. All right, salmon, krumkaka. Santa Lucia, lefse, rosettes, yes. Fantastic. I'm going to see if I can do all this. Oops. See if I can do this at once. All right, dill. All right, let's see. Salmon. Krumkaka.
Oh, I better put.
Santa Lucia. Yes, a lot of cookies here. It's fantastic. And the Christmas goat. Wow, we've got a ringer in the audience. Look at that. All right. Cool. So a decent amount of different experiences there. So then my next question. Oh, there it was, akavit. It's just a matter of time. Yes, absolutely. So how many people, we had Christmas pop up there, we had Santa Lucia pop up there. How many people actually celebrate these holidays, at least here in the US? Just put something there in the chat, or you can. There's a few me's and some yeses. Christmas, yeah. So a lot of food and some drink got mentioned there. How many of you have eaten these things or made these things? Lesser, is that sandbak is good. Less good, some cookies. Saffron buns. Scandinavian style Christmas table, good, good. So the fun thing with this is what we start to see is some overlap, right? Oh, pickled herring, yes, absolutely. It's a classic to have on the julbord, the Christmas table for food. So what we should be seeing here is all these different foods, and hopefully what you notice is there's some overlap, right? There's some things that a lot of people were familiar with and kind of associate with the holidays, and some things maybe less so. And we're actually then going to talk about, I'm going to start with one of the things that popped up, St. Lucy's Day, Santa Lucia in Swedish. So Lucia is an Italian saint, a Catholic Italian saint who ended up, well, as a pretty important Swedish holiday in very Lutheran Sweden. And there's plenty to be found about Lucia, St. Lucy. Most of it is kind of hard to pin down because of those kind of pesky hagiographies. She was Italian. She was born sometime around the year 283. She died sometime around the year 304. She maybe had her eyes gouged out. She might have been stabbed in the throat by a spear. She might have been burned alive. We don't really know, but we know she was viewed as a Christian martyr. Celebrated then as a Catholic saint that, like I said, just happens to be super popular in Protestant Sweden. So how did that happen, right? It's a lot of years between 304 and 2020. So Sweden has a long history of different religious traditions. St. Lucy, her feast day just happened to fall on December 13th, which had been the longest night of the year until Pope Gregory the 13th changed the calendar in 1582, which kind of adjusted that calendar quite a bit. But Swedes had long been celebrating the longest night of the year by celebrating with light, with candles, with fire, bonfires, anything to light up this longest night of the year. And this was happening long before Pope Gregory the 13th made any changes to the calendar. So we were already in Sweden celebrating this longest night of the year, right around December 13th, December 20th-ish. So when the calendar changed, the Christian celebration of St. Lucy came together with a long tradition of what we might refer to today as kind of pagan beliefs. So we have candles, and we have light, we have fire, and we have a preparation for a winter feast. But most of these celebrations were taking part in a more rural area of Sweden. That was until about the 1800s. So it was around then that young people from those rural areas that were celebrating St. Lucy's feast day, Santa Lucia, started heading off to university. They started heading off to Uppsala. They started heading off to Lund, the two big universities in Sweden, where they helped to spread that tradition. Because universities were dominated by men at the time, many Lucias were men. So we see here one of the first kind of public images of a Lucia was this one from 1875 down in Lund. By the 1890s, this holiday had started to make its way up to Stockholm with a little help from Skansen, the large open-air museum that opened in 1891. Part of that is because Skansen, this large museum, was starting to be viewed as a place to maintain and preserve Swedishness. And so that Swedishness idea gets super complicated and is still complicated today. And the role that an open air museum plays in that is really an interesting one. But what we know is that kind of solidified it to some extent, that this is a thing that matters now. And by 1920, the holiday was a really big deal. Swedes throughout the country began to celebrate. And it was around this time that the stjärngossar, these star boys that we see here, became another dominant figure behind Lucia. In 1927, Stockholm's Dagblad, a daily newspaper in Stockholm and now defunct, held a competition to crown Lucia. And that tradition has continued to this day. Now schools and cities and of course Skansen continue to crown a new Lucia each year. So we see the star boys here, but they were not the only ones hanging out with Lucia. So today, a Lucia procession involves Lucia walking in a white dress, usually with a red sash and a crown of light upon her head, singing. A lot of times in Sweden, although not as often anymore, those lights are live candles, and they'll put a wet towel under the wreath to keep the very hot wax from dripping on people's heads. And then following Lucia in this procession are 12 tärnor, which are these kind of maids, essentially, these white-clad maids dressed in long white robes, sometimes wearing a sash, but not always, sometimes wearing a wreath upon their heads, but not always, sometimes carrying a candle, but not always, sometimes carrying coffee and cookies and cakes, but not always. Then you also get the stjärngossar, the star boys. They're dressed in white. They're wearing those cone hats that we saw. Sometimes you'll even see a little tomte, a little Santa following behind. And if you're super lucky, and if you're hanging out with a bunch of little kids, you might even see a pepparkaksgubbe or pepparkaksgumma, which are gingerbread or ginger cookie boys and ginger cookie girls. So we see already now that this tradition has really expanded quite a bit. It's not just Lucia, it's not just the star boys, it's not just these maids following along, but we're making place for more and more people, especially kids, in this tradition. All the while this procession is going, songs are being sung. Pepparkakor, those gingerbread snaps. Lussebullar, these are these Lucia buns that you see right here, are handed out. Coffee comes with it. Depending on the time of day, glögg, which is a mulled wine, is served. And people have a lot of fun with this. It's an interesting time to be in Sweden, because if you're working in Sweden, there's a very good chance that your workday will be pleasantly interrupted by a procession, oftentimes from a local school, coming with these treats and coffee, and maybe not the mulled wine to work, but a alcohol-free version, at least. And there are recipes everywhere for lussebullar, or these Lucia buns. They're saffron-based. They've got these little raisins on top that you see there. I quite like them. A lot of people dip them in their coffee. Some people think they're a little dry, but I quite enjoy them. Of course, we also see this celebration here in the US, in Swedish-American communities as well. And someone mentioned that they had celebrated Santa Lucia here. This, though, is probably a more recent development. So remember, I said the holidays were really quite regional until the 1890s, and Swedish immigration to the United States began decades before that. Between, like 1850 and 1925-ish, we had over 1 million Swedes come to the United States. A lot of them stayed, but about 20% actually returned home. Many migrants from Sweden were never planning on staying. But a lot of them did. And what we can learn from that is that there was obviously a lot of contact between Sweden and Swedish America, enough so that we can start seeing these traditions pop up. But it also tells us, of course, that when people came, no matter when they came, they brought their new traditions. So this new tradition, not so new to us today, but this new tradition in the 1890s was something that came with a lot of Swedes. And because by the early 1900s, it was kind of seen as pan-Swedish, we can also see how it was more easily adopted into the Swedish-American community. And I like this picture a lot for a variety of reasons. One, I think the American Swedish Institute does fantastic work up in Minneapolis there. But we see the American flag and the Swedish flag in front of all of these mostly young kids preparing for the Santa Lucia festivities. So Lucia, though, is kind of a precursor to Christmas in Sweden. And while Lucia is somewhat unique to Sweden, Christmas, not surprisingly, can be found throughout the Nordic countries. And all of these countries have their own kind of unique attributes when it comes to their holiday traditions. But they also have a bunch of similarities. And so eves are important. So Christmas Day is still the 25th, but a bunch of the celebrations are on the 24th, usually when Santa shows up, like I said, in the evening, usually when we open presents, a lot of food, a lot of drink. But sometimes we're also visited by a Christmas goat, a giant walking goat. So I'm actually going to focus on one of those, to focus on that similarity, to focus on the Christmas goat, which is maybe not the first thing that pops into your mind when you're thinking about a Nordic Christmas. But the goat is a really common feature of Nordic Christmases. Is it Krampus? Is a fantastic question. Probably not. We're going to talk a little bit about that, actually. So that's a wonderful precursor. So these Nordic goats, these Christmas goats, in Finland we get my Finnish is terrible, but juhlapukki, which literally translates as Christmas goat, but today resembles the Santa Claus of Coca-Cola fame that we're kind of familiar with. There's Gävlebocken, which is a giant straw goat built every year before Christmas in Gävle, Sweden. Gävlebocken has their own Twitter account, in case you really want to see what's going on. There's often a live stream of the goat, mostly because every year Gävlebocken bravely stares down arson attempts for the entire month of December, surviving quite a few of them, thanks to a lot of creative efforts by the local community leaders. There's also julebooking, which could literally be translated as Christmas goating, as in people dress up as goats and go door to door asking for food or drink in Scandinavian countries. And this was especially common in Norway. And we saw it in a bunch of American states as well, especially those of the upper Midwest. And then, of course, the one that I'm most familiar with because of my family is the Christmas goat, julbocken, on the Swedish island of Gotland, which, while close to being goat land, is not in fact a goat land. So goats are not uncommon creatures in Nordic folklore. The most obvious are, of course, the two goats responsible for hauling Thor and his hammer all around Scandinavia. So it's often easy then, right? So we've got this kind of Viking age mythology, and it's often easy to just draw a straight line then from medieval sagas about the Viking mythologies that gave us Thor and his goats to the goats of Christmas present. So it might be easy, but it's not necessarily correct. So there are undoubtedly many pre-Christian beliefs that carried over once the Nordic people converted. But just as in science, correlation does not equal causation. So the fact is, we don't really know why goats play so heavily in Scandinavian Christmas. Jonas Engman, ethnologist and chief archivist at the Nordic Museum in Stockholm, he writes that Saint Nicholas, whose feast day in the Catholic tradition is December 6th, was often portrayed as having tamed the devil in various folk traditions, including miracle plays. And the devil would often be depicted in the form of a goat, which was a pretty common tradition across medieval Europe. And this devil goat would sometimes be leashed by Saint Nicholas for the world to see. Similarly, in parts of the German-speaking Europe, this is where we get Krampus also, especially on December 6th, kind of in conjunction with Saint Nicholas Day. So in 18th and 19th century Sweden, though, we're pretty far removed at this point from Catholicism, the goat remained. And instead of Saint Nicholas parading the devil around on a leash, the goats of Scandinavia began handing out presents. So it's not as far-fetched as you might imagine, because Saint Nicholas had been known to give presents to small children. So we subtract the Catholic Saint Nicholas, we leave the devilish goat, but remove the devil part, and ta-da, we have a new tradition. Because again, if there's literally anything you take from this, tradition is change. We're constantly seeing traditions change, kind of drastically, like in this case, and other times not so drastically. In the US, we also had the Christmas goat. As I mentioned, we got julebooking, which the Norwegians and some other ethnic groups brought with them across the Atlantic, and then continued here in the upper Midwest in states like Iowa, Minnesota, and of course, Wisconsin. Similar to Christmas mumming in countries throughout Europe, julebooking, as Kathleen Stoker writes, she's a folklorist who has a fantastic book called Keeping Christmas, Yuletide Traditions in Norway and the New Land. Julebooking was both a form of social control and an opportunity for subversion. So again, this is why I start with folklore, right? Like, what do some of these traditions mean? Why do we do them? Why do they matter? So julebooking, the julebookers would barge into homes, and they would demand food, and they would demand drink, and oftentimes they'd be singing songs or playing a fiddle tune. The people whose homes had just been barged into oftentimes were tried to guess who was behind the mask. And these people were dressed as goats, but they were also cross-dressing sometimes, and just dressing up in masks or whatever they could find. They'd sing, they'd dance, they'd scare the kids, and they would abandon all polite behavior. While this was going on, like I mentioned, the homeowners would be interrogating the costume community members. They'd be grabbing at them, they'd be staring at them in hopes of identifying who was behind the mask. And finally, whether through a good guess or because the Yule Bookers would eventually remove the mask, their identities would be revealed. And these Yule Bookers, they could dress up as they saw fit. So we get the goat. The ghosts come more at Halloween, the goat. But like I mentioned, they also were cross-dressing. And doing this subverted these social norms. So by going door to door, demanding food and drink, this is not something you usually did in the community. They were subverting these social norms, but they were also checking in on their community. Were you ready? Were you prepared for the holidays? Your neighbors, your families, your friends, they were going to come and visit. Were you ready? Were the Christmas cookies baked? Was the akavit ready to be served? Was the home clean and prepared for guests? As Stoker writes, this gave assurance that each family was complying with social norms and then could be relied upon in times of trouble. And that seems a little silly sometimes, right? Like, we're just barging in, this is fun, this is all, it's a game, it's a little tradition we do, but this tradition suggests, are you a part of the community? And if you're a part of the community, can we trust you to continue to be part of the community and take care of us in times of need? Newcomers were often welcomed to the community through this tradition, right? This is maybe a horrifying way to be welcomed to the community, but it's one way to be brought into that community. And old timers, often behind the mask, were able to kind of solidify their place in that community. By the 1940s, though, this tradition that had survived a trip across the Atlantic was fading. Didn't take long, though. By the 1970s, we already saw a revival underway. We saw a lot of revivals in the 1970s with folk traditions, especially ethnic folk traditions. And a lot of people kind of attribute this to kind of the roots phenomenon. We saw this revival with Hardanger fiddle playing, for example, another Norwegian tradition. Today, in 2020, tradition's not nearly as common as it once was, but some communities are still participating in Yule booking. Some even here in the upper Midwest, down in Argyle, they still have a Yule booking. Down near Augustana College, there's also, a friend sent me a picture a couple of years ago of someone dressed up as a Yule booker and was kind of taken aback because in the middle of the afternoon, here comes someone dressed as a Christmas goat. But this tradition has changed a little bit. There's less a focus today on this social control and subversion and more a focus on entertainment. This is fun. This is a fun way to take part in our ethnic heritage. And that's another legitimate part of folk traditions, right? So we can say, oh, it's for social control, it's for subversion, it's for identity performance, and it's all of those things, but sometimes it's also just because it's fun. Hopefully, you'll have noticed that food and drink are important to this tradition as well. Just like the coffee and glögg and the cookies and the lussebullar during Santa Lucia, Yule bookers were going door to door expecting something to snack on and something to quench their thirst. Whether that was for fun or for some type of social control, the end result was that food mattered. The cookies provided to your neighbors mattered. Today, while Yule booking has faded, the cookie making hasn't. A lot of you named several different types of cookies, especially Norwegian cookies. And That's not super surprising. In the Norwegian Christmas tradition, we often hear about making 7 different types of cookies. Some of the popular versions are the fattigmann, the krumkake, and the rosette. But this cookie tradition is changing all of the time. Chances are that your family's 7 cookies, if you're still doing 7 different types of cookies, differ slightly from someone else's. And that's okay, right? There are no right 7 cookies that need to be made in the Norwegian Christmas tradition. These traditions are real and important regardless of which 7 cookies you choose to make, or if you decide to only make 1 or 3 or 10. But this demonstrates again just how our traditions change, right? Maybe one person hates the taste of a certain cookie, so when they grow up, they remove it from their rotation. Or another person doesn't like twisting the dough to make a specific type of cookie, so when they grow up, they remove that one from their rotation. And all of a sudden, we see a tradition slightly changing, right? It's not as drastic, maybe, as a move to a Christmas goat, but it's still a change nonetheless. Also, I love this picture. This is my coworker Anna Ruth's picture that she took, and this young gentleman is very excited for the cookies at Vesterheim in Decorah, Iowa. But why does any of this matter, right? So I've just thrown a lot of changes at you, a lot of things about Swedish traditions, Norwegian traditions, Scandinavian traditions. Why does it matter? Because over 100 years ago, Swedes and other Scandinavians began coming to this country and brought with them their holidays and their clothes and their foods. And they brought with them their language. Oftentimes it took them several generations to learn English. I still meet with people who didn't learn English until they turned 6 when they started going to school. Today, then, the goats that roamed the Nordic countries and even Nordic America, they're different than they once were. Same with the cookies, right? This is not surprising because, as any folklorist will tell you, traditions change. Traditions change because the old meanings are no longer relevant, but new meanings can be applied to old forms. These traditions change because we change them. Maybe we stop going door to door dressed as goats to try to pressure people into baking delicious cookies for the holidays. Or we stop handing out presents to children while dressed as goats to try to scare kids into good behavior. Instead, maybe we make these traditions relevant to our own place and time, tweaking one little thing here, changing another thing there, until the tradition becomes our own. And that's the beauty of the traditions that we carry with us. Not that they never change at all, but that they do change. They ground us in our past, they reflect our present, and they change for our future. So with that, I'm gonna flip over to opening this up to questions. I love this, by the way. This is a scene from Pippi Longstocking. This is how it this is how it looks at my house around Christmas when my mom and us are trying to cook. It is not a clean situation at all. But I'll stop sharing here and just kind of open this up to questions. And you can either, I don't know how we want to do this. You can type them into the chat, or you can shout them out or raise your hand in the participant list. Whatever you all want to do. Are sandbakas ever filled or not? Sorry, I missed that there. Yes, they can be a lot of times. So I guess I'll start real quick. So a lot of these cookies, a lot of these Norwegian cookies especially are, they're I'm going to use a word that I'm not super thrilled about, but they're kind of basic sugar cookies. And I put basic in these quotation marks because they are very complicated when you start looking at the different shapes and the way they're put together and all this. And there's a real art form to it. But they're all kind of variants of different types of sugar cookies. And sandbakkels are, they kind of look like cups, I guess. And sometimes they're served just empty as delicious sugar cookies. Sometimes they are filled though, and a lot of times they're filled with fruits, especially berries. And sometimes you'll get a little like sweet cream mixed in there as well. But again, this is one of those things, right? Like different families and different places throughout Norway are going to have these different ways of serving these things, which is a lot of fun to see. But the base is still that cookie.
How about evergreens? Are
They're part of the Christmas celebration.
Yeah, is that an old thing?
The evergreens are, yeah. So I was doing some field work. Man, this was, I don't know, like 8 years ago, maybe. I was interviewing some folks up in the Green Bay area. And I talked to a woman up there who was using evergreen boughs to put in front of her front door. This is something that my parents still do at my home back in Colorado. And you put them on the front, like by the front door on the ground, and people walk on them. And the reason they walk on them is to kind of brush off the snow, brush off the winter gunk, get rid of all that stuff. In Colorado, though, when my family hosts their annual glögg party, they always have to remind people that it's okay to walk on them because people see this as a decoration that should not be stepped upon. This woman that I was interviewing up in Green Bay, she said she still does this, right? She still uses the evergreen boughs. She puts them out. She uses them to sweep in front of her front door. And she said, you know, I do it. My parents did it, and I'm going to make my poor darn kids do it as well. And we saw this kind of example of how do we take this one tradition, in this case, like part of the kind of evergreens, and bring them with us. We also have the trees. So in Sweden, you dress the tree. Oftentimes you will dance around it, singing songs. Maybe not as often anymore, but you used to have live candles in the tree. Turns out that's a bit of a fire hazard. And then on January 6th, people would throw the trees out their windows. And this is a tradition that still sort of happens. And it's one that I happily took part in when I was living in Sweden on the 12th floor of an apartment building. And I tossed my tree out the window, yelling down beforehand to make sure it was safe. But it's kind of the symbolic end of the Christmas season. It's the last day off, really, for people during the Christmas season. They head back to work usually on January 7th. So the Christmas tree, the evergreen, is definitely a big part of that. Penny asked, is baking so labor intensive because of the long winter nights? I don't know. It's a good question. I'm personally always a little hesitant to try to figure out, like, is it how is the environment that important to this, right? Because part of it is, of course, if you're going to be baking for that long, you need light. And candles, while beautiful, at least back in the day, were dangerous and still are somewhat dangerous, I guess. But so a lot of the preparation wasn't necessarily happening after dark, which is of course difficult because depending on where in Norway, Sweden, Finland you are, it's dark a lot. But so I'm not really sure about that. And Kathy's got the glögg. That's good. I quite enjoy glögg, actually. It's very good. So one thing we didn't talk about that I want to just kind of briefly mention, I think it might have been Tristan who put it in there, was the Christmas table, the julbord. And this is a really common kind of buffet style way of serving Christmas foods. It's kind of over, I don't know, it's kind of overwhelming sometimes with the amount of food that's served. And there's multiple courses, and you generally start with a certain, like go in a certain order, and we start with fish, for example, and then we maybe move to the ham, and then we go for bread and cheeses and all sorts of stuff. Again, this kind of differs from family to family and place to place, but it's a big part of the tradition. And it's another way of kind of inviting in, I guess, inviting in family, inviting in friends, and building that community. So much of what we talk about when we talk about these traditions, I think we sometimes think of them as like, they're mine, they're my family's traditions, but so many of these are, they're meant to be shared. They're meant to be this communal thing that brings people together during the holiday season, which I think is one of the beautiful things about these large scale kind of buffet style events, because they're not necessarily just for a couple people, but they're for whoever you consider to be part of your friends and family. Yes. Is watching Donald Duck cartoons on Christmas Day still a thing? 100% yes. This is a weird tradition. It's very Swedish. It's super, super, super Swedish. And every year on the Swedish state, one of the Swedish state-run television stations, they show the same movie, and they show the same episode of Donald Duck and Donald Duck's Christmas, basically. And then they always throw in a couple new kind of Disney-based cartoons as well, but the main one is the same. This has been going on for a very long time, a couple generations now. When I was living in Sweden, I was probably, I don't know, let's say 10 years ago now. They were moving over to digital satellites. And there was a storm in southern Sweden that interrupted the signal. And this made national news because people throughout southern Sweden weren't able to take part in this very Swedish tradition of watching Donald Duck on Christmas Day. So yes, it is 100% still a thing. My family still does it. I still do it when I'm there. I introduced Amber, who's going to be speaking next week, to this tradition when she was there. She thought it was a little weird, but she jumped right in. So. Who has, I'd be curious to hear, we didn't mention lutefisk. I was just going to ask a question related actually to that. So lutefisk, I mean, you can't really, it's going to be a weird year this year. Up until, a global pandemic, you couldn't really go anywhere in the upper Midwest in the fall to early winter without finding somewhere that was serving a lutefisk dinner. Oftentimes a church basement, oftentimes a fraternal organization, oftentimes a cultural organization serving these lutefisk dinners. So lutefisk is a whitefish soaked in lye. It used to be soaked in kind of like birch ash based lye. It's often served with a ton of butter, sometimes, well, today, especially in the upper Midwest, it's often served alongside meatballs. I am convinced, and I think a lot of people would agree, this is because a lot of people don't really like lutefisk, and they need something to chase their lutefisk down with. There are diehards who love this stuff, though. It's not really for me, but lutefisk has really kind of created a really interesting tradition in and of itself here in the United States. Today, per capita, Americans eat more lutefisk than Swedes, Norwegians, Danes, Finns. And it's one of these things that kind of demonstrates, again, the way our traditions come with us and the way they change, and the way these traditions differ from Sweden and Norway, for example, and Swedish America and Norwegian America. It becomes a way to kind of present and perform our identity and say, you know, I am Norwegian because I eat lutefisk, and I dress up as a goat and play fiddle songs to my neighbor around the Christmas season. So this lutefisk is a really important part of what it means to be Norwegian American still today. And we see jokes about it. We see songs, hilarious songs, funny songs, sad songs. We see documentaries about it. There's a, let me see if I still have it pulled up. There's a mockumentary. I have to admit, I've not seen this yet, but I really would like to, called The Lutefisk Wars, that takes place in North Dakota. So the traditions around lutefisk are really pretty fascinating and an interesting part of the Nordic food and fun that happens here in the upper Midwest. But what I was going to ask was related to that. I'd be curious to hear what people are planning, if people are planning any sort of kind of Scandinavian-American, Nordic American celebrations this year. I know a lot of things are being canceled and kind of thrown into disarray. So we've only got a couple of minutes left here, but I'd love to hear in the chat, or if someone wants to speak up, what they're thinking of doing. Is anyone going to a lutefisk dinner, for example? Never heard of a lutefisk dinner. Oh no. The Orfordville Lutheran Church has been canceled. The lutefisk dinner there. There used to be, let me see if I can quickly find what I hope will be a fun little link here. There used to be a link online that kind of included all of basically the lutefisk dinners that were being hosted throughout the upper Midwest. It's an older site, and I'm not going to be able to find it this quickly, I'm afraid. Shoot. But there are tons of them. There are tons of them throughout the area. I would really recommend, again, this year is going to be a weird one, but if you can, try to find one. They're a lot of fun. There's some fantastic people there. It's a really interesting place to see these traditions taking place. It's a fun place to see people baking and cooking and bringing their own traditions out. Jane mentions the cardamom rolls. There are so many different kind of cookies and cakes and delicious foods that are available at these events. So I really would recommend, if you get a chance, to check one out. Someone asked about the ring cake at Lucia. So there's a couple potential answers, I guess. And I'll preface this by saying I don't totally know, to be perfectly honest. A lot of times we have kind of a pretty common baked good in Sweden, which is essentially a ring cake. It's usually just one layer, however. Sometimes around Lucia, they'll start putting candles in the ring cake. So essentially we get an additional wreath that we see here, just like the wreath, the crown wreath that the Lucia will wear. We also sometimes see tiered cakes like this. There's the classic, of course, kransekake, the Norwegian one, which again, like this is it's a work of art, the way these are made. But even the Lucia ring cake is sometimes sometimes, I'm losing the word, tiered. Goodness, it was very difficult to come with that word. So it's most likely just a way to kind of nod again to the importance of the wreath and the light and the celebration of light at this time of year. Egg salad on rye. Yeah, absolutely. Usually open-faced. We get all sorts of different interesting kind of open-faced sandwiches in Scandinavia. The Danes especially are very well known for their open-faced sandwiches. A lot of times we're eating rye bread, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Today, rye bread, I think, is sometimes considered a little bit fancier. But back in the day, rye bread was what you got. And it was the white, fluffy stuff that was a real treat, because rye was halfway readily available. That's something we could work with. So yeah, putting the egg salad and different types of this kind of these toppings on bread is very much a Scandinavian tradition. You get them a lot of times around the holiday season as well. They're easy finger food, for sure. There you go. Yeah, I mean, Norwegian, Swedish, I didn't even know that open-faced sandwiches weren't really a thing until in this country, until I went to college. In my family, we always, so I moved to the US when I was about 6. We always ate open-faced sandwiches. And my friends in college thought that was weird when I started doing that. They were very confused by the whole thing. And Tristan with his Icelandic rotten shark dish. Yes, that is another tradition. The Nordic countries, there's a lot of rotten things we're eating in the Nordic countries, or things that we've doused in lye or whatever it might be, for sure. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate it. What is the reason for that? Oh, I can be kind of a smart aleck here and respond to that. I mean, so the first reason is, of course, that when these traditions started, these foodways started, it's because we needed to figure out a way to store food, right? So we would bury them like shark and let it rot a little bit. We would douse them in lye. We would smoke them. We would salt them. We would whatever it took to preserve foods for long periods of time. I would say today some of the reason is some people legitimately like these things. First off, I don't want to dismiss that. Some people really do enjoy these things, but I think part of it today that the tradition continues is we don't need to eat these things anymore, right? We have refrigerators for the most part. We have freezers. We have ways of preserving food. The reason a lot of people eat these things, I think, is, as I mentioned, the context has changed a little bit. So now it's a way of kind of remembering our past. It's a way of being a part of, what great grandma used to eat. It's a way of reflecting who we are and where we came from today, in the present. And that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do it, right? But that we're choosing to do it. And that's a really important part of traditions as well, that we're choosing to do these things. And that's where we start to see these changes. We're choosing to make slight changes. We're choosing to eat rotten we're choosing to eat rotten shark for a different reason than we maybe did 200 years ago. But we're still doing it. And it becomes an important part of who we are. It becomes an important part of our heritage and our shared community. So there's a lot of reasons for why we do today, and I don't super like using this word either, but why we do some of these kind of weird things, right? These weird things are who we are. They make us who we are, and they bring us closer together with our community and with our family and friends. Maybe that's a good place to stop. That felt like kind of a nice little come together. I really do want to thank you all for coming. This was super nice. I hope everyone at some point gets to enjoy a Lucia dinner. I hope that you all get a chance to make some of your delicious baked goods, and I hope you all have a good holiday season once it actually hits. Even, you know, it's September, but like I said, there's eggnog ice cream already in the grocery store, so get ready.
Thank you very much, Marcus. And thank you, everybody else, for participating. This is fun.
Thanks, everyone.